Hi, my name is Audrey Morrissey, and I am the co-executive director at My Life, My Choice. My Life, My Choice has been around since 2002, and how it came about was due to the death of a young person who was living in a DCF-funded group home. Unfortunately, it was after her murder, then it was revealed that this young person had a history of exploitation, that people began to take a look at this issue. One of the things that I am proud to say is that our Department of Children's and Families in Massachusetts is one of the first departments in the country to look at this issue and say that these are our children and what can we do to prevent this from happening. And so at that time, Lisa Goldblatt Grace, who was my other co-executive director and another survivor, were kind of hired to come up with a way to prevent this from happening to young people. And so one of the things that was developed is a 10-week prevention curriculum. And that curriculum to date has been used in 36 states across the country and including Canada. And what we do is we go into schools, group homes, really any facility that works with adolescent girls to educate them around exploitation and what that looks like and how to see the signs that someone is trying to exploit them. And then around 2004, I founded our mentoring program. And our mentoring program is where we pair youth with adults, survivors of the commercial sex industry, for a one-on-one survivor mentoring relationship. And what we've found over the years is how important it is for a young person to have someone in their life that they can identify with, someone who can say, me too, I went through the same thing, my life has changed, and I want to be a support to you to help you to come out of this harmful industry, and not by telling you what to do, not by walking in front of you or not by walking behind you, but walking alongside you to come up with solutions for a young person to really have a life without exploitation. This training has been developed with a trauma-informed lens, tons of survivor expertise. We make no assumptions that folks in our training might not, some of the folks might be survivors, or some people might be affected by someone in their family or someone they care about that this has happened to. So I do want to acknowledge that this material is heavy, very trauma and survivor informed, and we don't make any assumptions whether people who attend our trainings or who is watching this video has had that experience. What I do is encourage you, if the material seems triggering or hard, that you just pause it, take some time for yourself, and then return back to the video. And if you are a survivor of exploitation, my contact information is here. Feel free to reach out to me if you need to process what has come up for you, and I'll be more than happy to support you in that area. We're going to dive right in and talk about language. So the first thing I want to talk about is the term teen prostitute. Now, we know what comes to mind when folks hear the term teen prostitute. Most people will say things like slut, whore, it's the parents' fault, they're doing it because they want to, they came from a bad family. And when we ask, what do you think should be done with the teen prostitute? Most people will say, lock them up, get them off our streets. They're a menace to our society. But then if I stop those same people and I say, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the term commercially sexually exploited child? Then you'll hear things like victim. And so people understand that if there's a victim, then there's a perpetrator. And then when I ask people, well, what should be done to a young person who has been commercially sexually exploited? And people will say they need services, that it is a community effort. And people then understand that this is something that has been done to a child, that this is not something that is choice, right? So, a matter of fact, when you switch the language, it is opposite of choice. And so people really see the issue for what it is. So I really encourage people not to use the term teen prostitute. The correct term is commercial sexual exploitation of children, which basically means someone profits off the sale of that child. The acronym for that is CSEC. And the term CSEC, really what that means is that it is a form of child sexual abuse. It includes remuneration in the form of something of value to that child, money, goods, or services. A lot of you who work with young people may have seen young people who return from being missing from care. They might have expensive cell phones, different clothing. These are things to really pay attention to, because exploitation is not just about the exchange of money. It makes me think about when I'm running the prevention groups and we kind of talk about this, and the young people think that it's always about money when it is an exchange of anything of value to that child. Sometimes it's, people will take advantage of them to buy them food, give them a ride home, get their nails done, and really understanding that if you exchange anything for sex, that is a form of commercial sexual exploitation of that child. The other thing that exploiters do is they prey on children's vulnerabilities. And most of the young people that we serve are in the care of our Department of Children's and Families. And what could make a young person more vulnerable than being removed from their family? Again, this makes me think about the groups and me talking to the young people. And I'm always saying to them, when you're missing from care, when you start telling people I'm in a program, I don't live with my family, what you have done, you've given an exploiter just what they needed to say that you would be the perfect victim for them, right? And that helping them understand that they're giving out too much information. The other thing that CSEC is not, it is not delinquency. I remember when I first started going into group homes and I would hear the kids yelling, screaming, I'd hear them being restrained. And I was like, oh my God, these kids are off the hook. And as I continue to mentor and sit down with young people and have these one-on-one conversations, the more I saw myself in them and the more I got in touch with how I acted out. Because I am a survivor of the commercial sex industry. And I think about being young, how I acted out. And part of my acting out was to back you up from me, to keep you from asking me the tough questions, the questions that would probably make me break down in tears. But I had to put my armor on and make you think that, I had it going on and I'm doing this because this is something I choose to do, right? And so I learned very quickly that it is not delinquency. That's about the armor and the mask that our young people will wear. The other thing CSEC is not, it is not promiscuity. I hate that word. I'm going to give you an example. You think of yourself with your partner that you love having sex with. Now imagine your partner saying to you, I require that you have to have sex with me 10 to 20 times a day. I'm sure most of you would be like, I don't think so. I know when I met my sweetie, if he had said to me, oh, Audrey, before we go on our first date, I want you to know that I require that you have sex with me 10 to 20 times a day. I know I would have, got away from him as fast as I possibly could. I use that example because how could you think you can't have sex with someone you love 10 to 20 times a day? How could you possibly think someone in the life loves having sex with strangers, people they don't even know, right? So it is not that. And again, language is everything. And so let's talk about what CSEC includes. Street prostitution, stripping, bachelor parties, gang-based exploitation, survival trafficking into familiar exploitation, internet exploitation, child sexual abuse material. And I want to talk a little bit about street prostitution, which is something we don't see a lot of anymore. But it is where I came from. When I was in life, it was before the internet. And one of the things that I'll say about street prostitution is that we were visible. People saw us. We had a community, right? If a car pulled up and I thought, okay, this guy looks a little shady, I could always call someone over and say, hey, my friend has your license plate, knows what you look like. Now, I'm not saying horrific things didn't happen to girls and women in the life when I was in the life, but there's still something to being seen. People are less likely, right, if they have witnesses and being seen, less likely to cause a problem, right? Not only that, if a child was missing, the combat zone was an area in Boston where all the strip clubs were, the porn movie theaters, porn peep shows, everything was in one area. And so it wasn't unusual for someone to drive through the combat zone at night and be able to spot someone's child and be able to tell that parent, hey, I saw your daughter out on the track in the combat zone, right? But when we think about today, right, our children now are sold through the internet, which I could not imagine. So you think of a child being put in a hotel room. The only person that knows that that child is in that hotel room is the exploiter that put them there and the buyers who are going in and out of that room purchasing that young person. And then that makes me think about when I was in the life, invisible, in the higher end hotels, if a buyer said to me, hey, I'm staying at such and such hotel, I'm in room 301, meet me there in an hour. There were many times I would go in those hotels and I was stopped immediately. Miss, where are you going? Do you have a key here? And of course, I'd lie and say, I'm staying here. But of course, I didn't have a key or an ID to show them. And so I was escorted out of the lobby. But I ask you this question. Do you think a white male is ever questioned when he goes through a hotel lobby to purchase our children? Do you think anyone ever stops him and says, excuse me, sir, do you have a room here? Absolutely not, right? So when I think of myself and what the young people are up against today, being in a room and from the exploiter to the buyer, those are the people with the power that this young person is trapped in this room with. They're still being robbed, raped, beaten. They're not going to run downstairs to the lobby and say, hey, I'm selling sex upstairs in such and such a room and a guy just raped me or robbed me, right? And that, to me, is very scary to imagine being trapped behind, 4 walls and you're a child and everyone you encounter has some level of power over you. The other thing that I want to talk about, strip clubs. Most of the referrals that My Life, My Choice had gotten over the years were from Rhode Island. The combat zone, that industry really shut down around 92, 93. But Rhode Island had tons of strip clubs. As a matter of fact, at one time, Rhode Island, prostitution was legal in Rhode Island indoors, but not on the street. And so a lot of times exploiters put the young people in the strip clubs and then they can go in the back rooms with the buyers. And to date, it is not legal, but it is still, those strip clubs are still used as a gateway for exploiting our young people. I remember My Life, My Choice getting 2 referrals. They did a sting in a strip club in Rhode Island. They found a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old in the strip club. They pressed charges, and their exploiter got 33 years. And what was really crazy was the exploiter was my age, was someone I knew when I was in the life, who had just gotten out of prison for the same thing, serving 13 years, and ended up getting 88 years. And when you really think about a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old, right, in a strip club, one of the things that reminds me of, and I always want to say, anywhere that there is an adult sex industry, there are always children. And then we'll hear about survival trafficking. A lot of times we'll hear more about that with boys, our trans youth, like, this is how I survive. They may have been put out of their homes because they're gay or their gender expression, and their peers will show them, like, this is how we survive out here. But even with that, again, keeping in mind that the buyers are adults who are buying our children. And then the interfamiliar pimping usually happens at a younger age. But when the kids get older, a lot of them will run away from home. But who do they end up encountering? Other exploiters. And they're ready for the task, right? Because they've already been conditioned that people who love me, even my family, sell me. So some of that messaging is, that's my worth, and that's what people do to me. And so it is a vicious cycle, and there are so many ways in which our young people are brought into the commercial sex industry. And the other thing that I do want to talk about, media images of sexual exploitation. And when you look at this slide, the media is always exaggerating things. I think about every time I do an interview, they always exaggerate something I said, right, to date. And this is no different. And there's a term that people use, rescue, which is a term that I cannot stand, and I'll tell you why. Because this is not, okay, I found the victim, they're out, end of story. This is like a roller coaster ride, and you'll hear more about how that works as I go on. But to talk about this particular slide, young people are not chained to radiators or behind a fence. We haven't gotten one referral since 2004 that said young person was found in basement, chained to a fence. Now, I've seen these stories where someone is harboring that child for their own sexual use in their homes. But the truth of the matter is, a buyer is not going down in a basement where someone's tied up to purchase sex for them. That's just not the reality of what it looks like. But what I will say is that there are chains involved, but they're invisible. So you think of the cult leader. What does a cult leader do? Makes their followers see the world through their eyes as they see it, believe what they believe. Same thing here, right? The most powerful tool that exploiter can have is to lock someone down mentally. You have more power over them than chaining them to a radiator in a basement. And not to mention, if I was walking down the street, saw a girl peeking through a fence, and she said help, and I call 911, I could use the term rescue then. Why? Because that young person is not going back to the scene of the crime to be tied to a radiator, right? But when someone is locked down mentally, this is when your work becomes hard, because you're saying, why are they running back and forth? And we'll talk a little bit about how that piece works. But this is definitely not what we see. We see the lockup, the mental lockdown.
So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, it's kind of shocking to me that in 2023, only 23 years ago, we established federal legislation to protect our children. Prior to that, young people as young as 12, 13, 14 were being arrested and charged for adult crimes that they didn't commit, being charged for sex for a fee or common night walking. But in 2000, we established a Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which really laid the foundation for how we were going to combat the commercial sexual exploitation of children in this country. And so what that did was, regardless of force, fraud, or coercion, if someone was under the age of 18, they should be seen as a child and therefore not charged. Now, this law was most recently updated in 2019, but it really did establish how we could best serve this population. Now, what's concerning to me is in 2023, we don't have 50 states that operate under universal protections of children, which means depending on where you live, children can still be arrested and charged on a state-by-state basis. Now, in 2023, we have 36 states that have safe harbor protections, which protect anyone under the age of 18 from being charged. In Massachusetts, in 2012, we established safe harbor legislation. It was never officially passed into law, but we've been operating as if it is since 2012. Now, what does that mean? Well, as a mandated reporter, you must report anyone under the age of 18, regardless of sexual orientation or gender, regardless if there's a trafficker involved or not. If you suspect, and when I say suspect, the threshold is very low, meaning you don't need evidence, proof, or disclosure to file this mandated report. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But the most important thing to know is that with Safe Harbor, it made sure that mandated reporters were not only reporting suspicions, but that children were being wrapped up in services that they deserve, whether that was through the Department of Mental Health, Department of Youth Services, or Department of Children and Families. And therefore, with this, buyers and traffickers could now be held accountable. So it was a really important shift in Massachusetts for us to be protecting children who had been trafficked. And then when I think about the different young people that My Life, My Choice serves on a year-by-year basis, well, you heard Audrey mention earlier about our Survivor Mentoring Program. And every single year, we serve anywhere from 200 to 300 young people in the state of Massachusetts through this program. We'll talk more about how to make a referral, but to give you some perspective, the average age of young people being referred to My Life, My Choice that identify as female is around 14 years old. And for those that identify as male, around 15 years old. Now, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the average age for being recruited and sold for the first time is between the ages of 12 and 15. And referrals year by year at My Life, My Choice continue to fall within that continuum. Since 2002, the average age of young girls referred to My Life, My Choice has not shifted, 14 years old. And then we look at some of the other risk factors of our mentees, right? This history of child sexual abuse, which if almost half of the young people we've served in the past year have disclosed, how many have not disclosed? How many do we not know about? Because with child sexual abuse, similar to trafficking, shame, humiliation, and embarrassment often prohibit children from coming forward. And then we look at other risk factors of mentees, right? Those that go missing from care. Well, for a lot of young people, this has become the coping strategy, but oftentimes running back to harm's way, thinking that these people have their back, right, and love them in a way. In addition to that, we also know that young people are best served by survivors. Now, you watching this training might say, well, I'm not a survivor, so how do I provide these services? Well, that's where the work comes in. How do you get yourself familiar with the resources in your community, like a My Life, My Choice? How do you partner with agencies that are putting survivors first, that are led by survivors? Because one of the statistics we've learned is that when young people meet survivors, one, not only do they establish rapport much faster, they develop trust. Sometimes that sense of safety is very different. But for more than half of the kids we served last year, they had never told a trusting adult they had been trafficked even when they'd been asked. So it's not that something's wrong with you. It's how do we leverage and partner with survivor-led services to wrap these kids up in services so they feel safe enough to disclose this has happened to them. And then we look at who do we serve? You know, as far as race and ethnicity, that changes from year to year. But there are some things that haven't changed. You know, 10 years ago, if I was doing this training, if you're looking at a pie chart, that little slice for white kids was much smaller. Probably about 20% of the referrals we received at that point were kids that identified as white. So what does that mean? You know, I'm not a researcher, but I know that white kids have always been trafficked. Why? because the commercial sex industry, similar to lots of systems and institutions in this country, is still racist, which means a young white girl is still going to be more profitable than a young girl of color. But to speak to that, we need to highlight the most vulnerable children. So if we know on average, between 20 to 30% of the young people that are mentored at My Life, My Choice identify as white, what about the rest of the children? And so one trend that has not shifted is that the majority of the kids that we receive through referrals every year identify as kids of color, in particular girls. And so when we think about those most at risk and vulnerable, that's who we're talking about here. So we're going to show you a video. It's about 3.5 minutes long. And one of the things I want to tell you before you watch the video is that you're not going to see any graphic images of our children or the young people we serve. Not even images related to trafficking in itself. But the video is powerful because what you're going to hear is survivor voice. In 2016, we had the privilege of partnering with somebody who taught our kids how to interview one another, to share how they'd met their buyer or their exploiter. And the reason why we show you this video, because it's really important to find, different ways, unique ways to incorporate survivor voice into trainings in a non-exploitive way. And so what you will hear, the power in this video is not the images. The power is in the voice. And so when you're watching this video, know that at the beginning you won't hear any sound. But as soon as pictures start showing up on your screen, pictures of current or prior My Life, My Choice staff, you'll start to hear youth talking about how easy it was for them to meet their buyer, their trafficker.
Some girls, they don't have any choice. Like, these pimps, they threaten you. They threaten your family. They threaten your little brother, your baby cousin, your nephew. A lot of girls that do have pimps, it's not fun.
Right.
You get your ass beat. You get your ass smacked.
Nobody wakes up every single day like, I want to have sex with a dozen of men.
Yeah.
Every single day. Like, for money that I can't even keep.
And as a young girl, we can't consent. When it was first introduced, I was like 15.
I had just turned 14.
Like around 10 and stuff like that. A pimp never asked me my age. To me, it's like they don't care because to them, it's like we're money to them.
One was my uncle, and I was really close to him growing up, and I think he took advantage of that, and he introduced me to this guy, and I went because, that was my uncle, and the guy was like, you're gonna go make money for me after we was like miles away in the highway.
I didn't exactly find him. He found me. I was on a bus on my way to Urban Improv, and he just hit me up, and I looked through his pictures and stuff like that. And one day we decided to start seeing each other. So we met up at Franklin Park, and we seen each other, and then we started talking about having sexual intercourse.
When a pimp first asks you your age and you tell them 13 or 14, they act like they're like, damn, really? Okay, well, you could start off by stripping. You don't need to have sex. And it's all bullshit. That's how they get you started. And once you're in that life, it's hard coming back out of it. He just looked like a rich white man. Like, he was clean. He had gray hair. His skin was mad pale. He just looked like a businessman. And, like, I could just see his hand till this day, like he was married. That stood out to me so much because it just shows you that anybody can come buy sex off of you.
I've been thinking lately a lot, I want to be like a detective, but for the drug unit. I used to say I'm going to settle for something like cosmetology or mechanic, but I feel like now I'm ready to become a drug unit detective.
I know this is, like, weird to say, like, I don't know, not a lot, but I feel pretty. And I feel like I don't have to hide today. Like, I want to speak up. Like, I'm okay with people staring at me today.
I'm happy and excited because I'm about to graduate 8th grade. It's about to be late. And I'm passing all my terms. Well, my second term was C's, but now I'm working on B's. As a parent, give your child more attention. Like, ask them how their school days are going. And for preteens and teens, just because you feel like you're not beautiful enough, you are in your own way.
So another thing that we need to talk about, because you also have to talk about the buyer. Who's buying people? And the profile of a buyer, most buyers are upper middle class white men with a salary range of at least $140,000 a year. 66% of them are married. And people like to imagine that the buyer is a creepy guy in a trench coat. I need to say there are not enough creepy guys in trench coats to make this a multi-billion, and yes, I said billion, not million, $billion industry. And what we find is that there's a lot of frequency buying amongst this population of buyers. And so how are they able to do that? Well, they have their own belief system. Buying sex is masculine. Doesn't everybody? It's normal. And I remember being in the life, and on the weekend, I remember like carloads would come through from the suburbs, where if there were 3 guys in a car, 2 had already purchased sex, but they're bringing their friend. Oh, you haven't bought a person yet? Oh, let me, I'll even pay for you. And so I did see a lot of that. The other thing that they believe is that women, that it reduces the likelihood of women being raped, which is such a myth. Girls and women in the life are the most raped class of women on the planet. The other belief that they had, that women are objects, sexually exploited people are less than. And so when we look at the profile of the gentleman in this photo, let's just say he's a lawyer. He's not going to proposition the women in his law firm at lunch break or recess. He's not going to say to them, I'll give you X amount of dollars if you have sex with me, because he sees them as valuable as people. In order to purchase someone, you have to think of them as less than you and less than a human being. The other thing that they believe, and I do understand why they believe this, that girls and women in life enjoy the act. Well, I always say, if they gave out Academy Awards when I was in the life, on this one, I would have a wall full of Academy Awards. You can't run over to a buyer saying, hey, I have an exploiter. I got to pay him. Please, please. I don't want to have sex with you. Just give me the money. No. Hi, honey. You make them believe like you're so happy to see them, particularly if they're a regular. And sometimes you are happy to see them because that might be the one where you're going to get your quota and you can go in after that, right? But it is so opposite of that. It is more of after the act, like saying like they don't make enough soap to scrub you off of me. But these are the beliefs and the rationalizations that buyers come up with in order to tell themselves that it's okay to buy people.
And so shifting gears a little bit, right? Let's talk about the media. How does the media sexualize our young people? This is really complicated. For some of you watching this, you grew up in a time where TV wasn't as, prevalent. We looked at magazines and things of that nature. Well, now we live in a digital world where we are constantly bombarded with images and videos and tweets and pictures and things of that nature. For some of us, we've become desensitized to some of the images that we see because it's constant, right? And by no means am I suggesting that the media sexualizing young people, in particular girls, is their fault, because it absolutely is not. But I need us to think about how those images, how those messages resonate for our young people, right? If I'm a young child and I have low self-esteem or low self-worth, or I have a trauma history, right? And I'm being bombarded on social media with images of what I'm supposed to look like or what's deemed as sexy or in this week, right? How would that impact my level of vulnerability? I might try really hard to fit in. I might want to wear certain clothes or change my eye color with contacts or things of that nature. And so again, I'm not suggesting that the media sexualizing our young children is the children's fault, but we have to think about how that increases vulnerability for our young people, and kind of the demands on wanting to fit in, and how can someone take advantage of that? And then I look at our porn industry. You know, I grew up during the time of the 80s. Now, some of you watching this grew up during that time. It was all about Playboy magazines, right? And you'd hear the stories about the brother or the cousin, you know, the magazine was found under the bed. And I'm not suggesting Playboy was good or bad. I remember walking into the bodegas, right? The little corner store back when there were magazine racks. So now I've just dated myself. And they'd be wrapped in plastic. You'd just see Playboy or Playgirl. And as a kid, you're curious, like, what is that? But you could never reach high enough to get that magazine, right? And so porn's always been present. But what a magazine portrays and what our kids can now stumble across are two very different things. In 2023, why a magazine when you could find live, graphic, free porn on the internet? Even when you're not trying, right? I have 3 sons of my own. And as a parent, you have to think about, how am I going to engage in these conversations? How do I talk to them about the realities of social media, about porn, about the digital world? We can pretend like it doesn't exist. We can avoid the conversations. And we don't have the privilege anymore of not engaging because they're going to find out one way or another. And I don't know about any of you, regardless of your role in this young person's life, wouldn't you rather hear it from a trusted adult, from a trusted source? Because the competition is the internet, what their friends are telling them, right? The messages they're receiving by stumbling across this or watching some of this stuff. So not to horrify you, but does anybody want to guess the average age or first time coming across porn? 11 years old. That means by statistics, 2 of my sons have watched porn. Now, I haven't actually had the conversation with them, but what does that mean? What does that tell us? And even when you're not trying, you can find it. I'll give you a personal example. A few years ago, when one of my sons was a little bit younger, I was looking for stocking stuffers, right? And the idea back then was, how do I find something that can go into a stocking that really kind of matched his interests, which back then were animals? So I went into Google, like most of us, and I typed in Zoo Magazine, which is a magazine that features an animal of the month. And very quickly, fortunately nobody was around, a whole bunch of naked images of women popped up on my screen. So you can imagine the horror on my face, and I'm very quickly looking around saying, oh my God, and very quickly edited it to say, Zoo Magazine for Kids. And that's when the actual magazine popped up. But it was a really good reminder. I wasn't even looking for this, and it found me. So we can make the assumption that our kids are actively seeking some of this out. And I'm sure some are, right? It's developmentally appropriate to be curious. But my guess is when they're doing those searches, they're not searching hardcore fetish porn, but that's what they're going to find. So 11 is the average age. Another statistic to know about, 90% of the porn that exists today shows violence against women. So what are our young people learning about expectations, consent or lack thereof, right? How they're supposed to engage in a sexual relationship, right? In addition to that, if 90% of the porn out there is violence against women, 1/3 of the internet is now pornography. So we can all sit here and pretend this doesn't exist. Not my kid, not my client. And the reality is, it's a very serious conversation we need to be having with all children, not just boys, right? Girls, boys, LGBTQIA, non-binary kids, because this is a reality, right? Our kids have access at a very young age, and even when they're not trying, they can stumble across us. So is porn the cause of the commercial sex industry? No, right? But it's definitely a piece of the puzzle. What are the messages our kids getting? The expectation, right? Of how does even somebody get in that video? Do they make a lot of money? And what are the myths they could be fed, right, by an exploiter to try to traffic them?
So now let's look at who's at risk. So who's at risk for exploitation? Youth who have not reached 18 years of age, youth who have access to a cell phone, tablet, etc., want more independence, are in the community without adult supervision, feel judged, feel like others don't get them, they want to fit in, they want to be in love, right? So according to this, all of our young people are at risk for exploitation. But what stands out to me the most is bullet 2, having access to that cell phone and having the ability to be in the community. I think of a story. I was training a new mentor. We went to pick up a young person who had an extensive history of exploitation. We were taking her clothing shopping, and so she gets in the car, and she says, my clinician said I can get a phone. So I said, well, let me call the program, make sure that you can get a phone. So the clinician was like, yep, she can get a phone. She had been working. She had access to the community. She would take public transportation to work. The program would pick her up in the evening because she got off like at 9 at night, and she was doing very well and had been in the program for like 9 months or more. And so after we went clothes shopping, we stopped at Best Buy. We got this young person a phone, dropped her off. The next day when I got to work, there was an email that this young person was missing from care. What had happened was she got in touch with an exploiter who lured her back to him. Now, I know we can't keep technology away from young people because they're really, really good at it. I know that a lot of programs might say to young people, go to the library. Young people are not going to the library to read books because when they're in programs, they don't have access to the internet. They're going right to those desktop computers and going on social media. And sometimes the first contact is not the exploiter. It could be a friend who's saying, girl, you need to come back around here. This is happening, that's happening. And the young person, when they leave the program, their intent is to come back, but now they've connected with someone on social media. Next thing you know, they're on a bus getting to that person, and that person might let them stay there a night or two. Now they're afraid to call the program or go back to the program. And so a lot of times then they will reach out to their exploiters as a way to have somewhere to stay. And then that vicious cycle happens over and over again. So it's really about educating our young people and really taking a look at, is it really a good thing to ban young people completely from technology or give them access to technology so that when they have time to be in the community, they can do it safely and not feeling like they have to do all these things all at once because things were taken away from them. So let's also talk about other risk factors, domestic violence. A lot of our youth come from homes where they witness domestic violence. And we know with domestic violence, it takes probably 7 to 10 times before the victim leaves. But what a young person sees in their home is that, I see the violence, but then I see the love, right? Buying my mother flowers or paying the bills or whatever the case may be. And so when this young person meets an exploiter and domestic violence is in that relationship, for them, it's like, well, my mother never left. And with exploitation, it works the same as domestic violence. 1 minute it's the violence, the next minute, it might be getting her hair and nails done. And so if a young person thinks this is what relationships look like, that's when you will really hear them blaming themselves. Oh, he did that because I did this, or I shouldn't have said that, right? So they're mimicking what they may have witnessed at home. Addiction. And I want to be real clear. Most exploiters do not want a victim with an addiction problem because they're not going to be honest. They're going to take the money and get high with that money. When addiction plays a part, usually the exploiter themselves are addicted and have turned that young person onto those drugs and then put them out there to make money to support both of their habits. But the truth of the matter is, the exploiters want money. They don't want someone who's really struggling with addiction. But how addiction plays out with our young people I think of myself, a woman in recovery. Thank God for my mother and that my mother had my children, because had I been in my own apartment, I would have been in the back room somewhere getting high, and my kids would have been out in the street. And what happens is people know, I think of my own community, they knew I was a drug addict in my community, and that would make my children vulnerable to exploiters, right? Because I'm not paying attention. And so we see a lot of kids ending up in that life because of addiction. Also, when you talk about interfamiliar exploitation, moms has a substance abuse problem, and I've seen mom being the exploiter in order to get more drugs. Mental health concerns, big one, learning disability, cognitive limitations. I served a young lady with serious cognitive limitations. And for her, when she went to school, she saw the kids were in relationships. She wasn't. She was referred to us because she was online talking to a man in his 30s, and she was 16 years old. But for her, it was the only way she could really get attention. And down the line, she had been exploited because of her inability to even say no, right? And her desire to have a man in her life was so strong that she couldn't, due to her mental health and her cognitive limitations, this poor kid could not make healthy decisions. And when they caught her exploiter, he was sentenced to 13 years. And when they interviewed him, one of the things that he said to law enforcement, he knew something was wrong with her after about an hour. So meaning he admitted that he saw that this young person had a mental health issue, but he still took advantage of her. So now I want to talk a little bit about how do exploiters exploit our youth. So there are 4 tactics. The first tactic is force. And we know what force is, right? When I think of force now and our young people, I think of the gang members, right? Who are cashing in because they've learned that I can only sell a drug once or a gun once, but I can sell a girl over and over again. And when a gang member says to a young person that comes from a community where it is a lot of gang violence in that community where that young person comes from, and a gang member says, I'll kill your brother, your mother, the young people already know how violent they are. A lot of them might have already lost a sibling, a peer, to gang violence. And so if a gang member threatens them and forces them, they already know what they're capable of. So for them, that's a no-brainer, right? The other tactic, the coercion tactic. And when I think of the coercion tactic, I think of a young lady walking down the street, car pulls over. Hey, cutie, how you doing? They start chit-chatting. He might say, hey, you want to smoke a blunt? And she gets in the car. They ride around. They might smoke a little weed. Then he's like, okay, you want me to drop you off? And she's like, yeah, I'm going home, right? Takes him right to her front door. So now he knows where she lives. And then when he says, well, what are you doing tomorrow? And she's like, I'm going to school. And he says, well, what time do you leave for school? And she says 7:30. And he's like, I'll pick you up. So she's like, okay, whatever, sounds good. Goes in the house. Next morning, gets up. The young person really forgot that they smoked a blunt last night with somebody, right? But they're getting ready for school. They come out with their little sister because they have to take their little sister to her bus stop. And he's right there waiting. And when she says, I have to take my sister to the bus stop, he's like, hey, I'll give you a ride. And so she thinks because she made it home safely yesterday that this person is cool. They both get in. He does drop the sister off, then takes her to school and asks her, what time do you get out of school? And she says, I get out of school at 2:30. Sure enough, at 2:30, he's out there. Now her ego was saying, oh my God, he's really into me. She gets in the car, they ride around. He begins to tell her who he is, how he gets money, how he wants her to get money with him. And she's like, I'm not doing that. Here's the coercion. If you don't, I know where your little sister's bus stop is. I'll get your little sister to do it. Now, this tactic wasn't used on me, but it absolutely would have worked. I remember being in middle school and I had to pick my sister up from her daycare and walk her home. If an exploiter said to me, I will get your sister, that would have had me. Why? Because I would have been more afraid of what my mother would have done to me if she found out that I put my little sister in a car with an exploiter, right? And so the coercion is using someone they care about. A lot of you have worked with young people who might have a history of childhood sexual abuse in the home. I've heard them say, I didn't say anything. I just let them do that to me so they wouldn't touch my little sister, right? So that's what the coercion is about. I've heard that with the baby's father, his family had the baby, and he said, if you don't work for me, I'll tell DCF you're doing it anyway, right? So using someone you care about. The other tactic is the befriending. Now, the befriending tactic is what I really see in group homes. I think of, a young lady comes into a group home with an extensive history of exploitation. She gets to the group home. The other girls are talking about the one girl that they don't like, that they don't talk to. And what I want you all to really understand in this recruitment, that a young person who is recruited into the commercial sex industry also is taught to recruit other girls, bring more victims to me, right? And not using that language, right? So that's part of their recruitment as well. And so the very girl that the other kids are saying, oh, we don't talk to her, that's the one that she befriends, right? There was a program where they took kids in that lived in Connecticut who had a history of exploitation into a Massachusetts group home. She had extensive history. She befriended a young lady that was in the group that I was running. And next thing I know, they're gone. They made it to Connecticut. The young lady got away, got to the police station after a couple of days. The program went to get her. So when I went to the program and asked her, what happened? I'm like, you've been sitting in the group, you've gotten some tools. And she said to me, well, they told me that we were going to have fun, make money. She said, but when I got there, they made me do everything. So for her, thank God she even had that awareness, something clicked like, wait a minute, they're using me. So she somehow got away and went to a police station, but thank God for that. But who can better befriend a young girl than another young girl? And those stories, and Nikki talks about that too, of the young person with the older guy that's 35. Oh, Audrey, they won't let me put him on my phone list. He's my friend. And I'm like, he's in his 30s. You're 16. What are you talking about? And this young person had a history of exploitation, right? And for me to have to kind of break down to her, honey, when an adult is really a friend and you're missing from care, that is not a secret relationship. If I had a 16-year-old in my life that I knew was in a group home, the first thing I'm going to do when you came to my house is tell you, I'm calling your program, I'm letting them know you're here, my address, let them know you're safe, and that they can come and pick you up. That's what caring adults do. Caring adults do not harbor children in their home or keep secrets for children. Now, the last tactic and the most powerful of them all, this is the one where they'll tell you to F off, and that is the seduction tactic. Now, all of the kids have a pattern of missing from care. Some kids might leave for a couple hours and come back. Some overnight and come back. Some a couple days. Some catch me if you can. But what a lot of them have in common is returning back saying, I stayed at this boy's house or my boyfriend's house. But usually after a couple of days, they have to leave, right? And they'll a lot of times come back to the program. But now she meets Mr. Wonderful, a little older, has his own apartment, doesn't live with mom, doesn't have those restrictions, doesn't have to hide you in the room or under the bed, right? And she realizes that, oh my God, I've been here a week, 2 weeks, because she even knows that usually after a couple of days, people put her out, right? But now he's like, I'm going to take you shopping. She might mention a low budget clothing store. And he's like, oh no, honey, you don't have to wear that anymore. I'm going to take you and get you some really nice things. He's feeding her well. The sex is great. Her friends are asking, oh my God, where'd you meet him? And this seduction tactic, it could take a month, 2 months, 3 months. This is so powerful because he already has other girls working for him. He seduced them all. He's sold them all a fantasy of, oh, you're 16. Next year, you'll be able to have your license. We'll get a nice car. We'll get a house. We'll run off in the sunset. And this usually happens always after sex and they're laying in the bed. And he says something like, oh my God, baby. You know what? I really don't even want to ask you to do nothing like this. Oh, this is hard for me. But listen, babe, I've been looking out for you. I've been holding the spot down, feeding you, clothing you. But I'm a little short on the rent this month. I have this guy. He'll pay you X amount of dollars. Now she's saying, oh my God, I don't want to do anything like that. But the other half of her is saying, but God, no one has ever treated me this good, right? And I can stay here. She thinks, okay, I'll do it just this once. And then after once, now look how you made that money. Now imagine what we would have if you continue to do this. In a year, we'll have enough money for a house and, we'll take off in the sunset. And for her, that sounds like a good plan. And then she's introduced to the other girls who's working for him. They've all been sold the same dream. And for some of you who are saying, well, why doesn't she wake up after that? You think of yourself. We all have something that we do that makes us feel good. Like that thing that keeps you on the hamster wheel, right? You jump off. It's not good for me, but I jump back on. For me, I think of substance use. When I first started doing heroin, oh my God, I'm in my glory. I'm numb. I feel nothing. And I would jump on and off that hamster wheel, right? Trying to capture that feeling that I had when I first used it. But now I'm addicted. Now I need it. It's not recreation anymore. Now, so I'm not in withdrawal, right? But I kept using it because I want that feeling I got in the beginning. For some people, it's like food. It's cigarettes. For the young person, they keep jumping on for the love, the fantasy. It used to be just me and him. It could be me and him again. He loves me. I love him. And I would say to you, on this tactic, do not say anything bad about the exploiter. And they're not using the term exploiter. That's my boyfriend and this seduction. And so for me, what I've done over the years when I was mentoring young people, and they would say things like, I love him. And as a survivor, I would say, I love mine too. I understand. But what I want you to do, babe, is write a list of what you love about him, what you hate about him. And when I come back next week, let's go over that. And when I go back, they're listening to their own voice. I'm not preaching to them, right? They're talking about what they love and what, I hate that he sells me. I hate that he puts his hands on me. It's like helping yourself. Even as an adult, if I call someone for help and I'm processing, a lot of times I will come to the answer myself and just need someone to listen to me. And with the seduction, that is what's needed. And it's not about walking in front of them or behind them, walking alongside them and treading very carefully, because they are really in love with this person and you say one thing off key, you've lost them. And so these are the 4 major tactics that have not changed over the years. The only thing that has changed is that now exploiters can talk to our children on social media 10 at a time, where in my day, they had to recruit them face-to-face, or the girls that they had already brought into the life would recruit other young people into the life. And so these are things that we have to educate our young people on when it comes to the different tactics that recruiters will use.
So now we have to talk a little bit about signs and behaviors. How do we know if a young person's been trafficked? Now I'm going to preface this by saying, just because a young person exhibits a sign or a behavior doesn't necessarily mean they've been trafficked. And one of the things you're going to find as I go through these is that realistically, some kids exhibit some of these signs when we think about other types of abuse, other forms of trauma. So for me, it's less about the one bullet that kind of stands out. It's really more about, I've been working with this young person. I've noticed a shift in behavior. And more recently, I've kind of heard 3 or 4 of these occurring and talking to the parent, noticing it in the kid myself. The bottom line is, when I start seeing a couple of these happening, again, in Massachusetts, we're really very, very lucky. The threshold to file a mandated report is very low. But let me go through some of these. So you have a kid in your care, in your custody that you're working with, that's gone missing from care, meaning they're not in their foster home, kin placement, program, school. They're not where they're supposed to be. A trusted adult does not know where they've been. It may be in-state, out-of-state. Now, that's not to say they'll go missing again, but it is a behavior we often see in young people that have been trafficked. What about physical marks of abuse? Not the most common. Those of us that work with young people know that most traffickers don't want a young person coming back and having physical marks where a trusted adult could see. Kind of makes sense, right? We'd ask questions. What happened to you? Where did you get that? Who did that to you? But then I think about PTSD. A lot of our young people don't necessarily have that formal diagnosis. But what do we know? We know that when young people have been horrifically trafficked, beaten, raped, robbed, sexually assaulted, that oftentimes when they come back, we see behaviors, a new presentation we didn't see before, right? And you don't have to be a licensed clinician to pick up on some of this stuff. You see insomnia, flashbacks, bedwetting, kind of like head on a swivel, hypervigilant to their surroundings. Maybe they're really scared when they hear loud noises or the presence of a male being in close proximity. So again, not to minimize or ignore those new things, but kind of acknowledge this is a shift in behavior we didn't see before. Now, for me, we talk about clothing and access to phones and jewelry and things of that nature in 2023. Most of our young people aren't getting dressed in a way that's going to raise flags for us adults, right? They don't want us to stop them per se. And so what we're really seeing in 2023 is this kid has acquired new items that they can't afford, right? Whether that's upgraded jeans, sneakers, Nike tech suits. They have new hair, wigs, weave, highlights, the new cell phone, the brand new iPhone that even I can't afford, but they have told you my boyfriend's purchased it for me. So for me, it's less about what they're wearing per se, as far as they're not wearing mini skirts and stilettos and things of that nature. But we've seen a shift in clothing that doesn't financially line up to them not having a job or their family being able to afford it, right? Nails and things of that nature being done regularly. And then we think about tattoos, branding. Now, I've worked with a lot of young people who have told me, Nikki, I'm going to go get a tattoo. And I'm not going to lie, when I worked in congregate care and I wasn't their custodial parent, I would say, you're going to have to ask your Department of Children and Families worker about that, right? Knowing they're absolutely going to say no. And what I know about our young people is, when and if they want it, they're going to find a way to go get it. Now, here's the hit. They're going to come back, and without you even asking, they're going to throw it in your face because they got over on you, right? Look what I got this weekend. I'm going to say, sweetie, it looks a little infected to me, right? That's not the one I'm worried about. The one I'm worried about is the one they don't want to talk about. The one that they physically shut down when you ask a question. They look anxious. They look nervous. They pull their hair to the side. Dollar signs, barcodes, street nicknames they've been given. This brings a ton of humiliation and shame. Those are the ones I'm talking about, right? Kids that are found in an area known for trafficking. Well, it's not like the 80s. There's no Blade stroller track anymore. There's not a place we can go to find our kids because most of it's on the internet. But perhaps this kid's photos or videos have been posted without them knowing. Videos sold to Pornhub, right? Things of that nature. Or you find out this kid's going to hotel parties or hanging out in strip clubs and they say things like, well, ma'am, I don't do that, but I have friends that do. And so then I'm still worried about safety, right? People, places, and things. I'm asking questions. Truancy from school can look like so many different things for kids. But in our kind of world, oftentimes school is the one place where these kids are successful. It's a structured, consistent environment, oftentimes where they're getting meals, eyes on. And so we work with schools too to say, like, how do we help them recognize these signs? Truancy from schools also shifted too, because now with phones, people find out, people see pictures, things are posted, there's cyberbullying and things of that nature. So we can't assume that a kid refusing to go to school is just because they're being a pain in the butt. Perhaps they're not going to school because everyone in school knows what happened this past weekend. Older boyfriends or girlfriends, and I'm not talking the 16-year-old that's with the 19-year-old. I'm talking about the 16-year-old that thinks it's okay to date the 35-year-old. And a conversation that never goes well, but I always like to plant the seed is, when you're 35 years old, do you want to date the 15-year-old boy or girl? What do you think the answer is? Absolutely not. That's disgusting, Nikki. Of course it is, right? And then they get hip to what you're trying to do. My point is, why can't that 35-year-old find someone their own age? Gang affiliation. Again, we're not suggesting that all kids that are affiliated with gangs are being trafficked, but I do worry about people, places, and things and overall safety. Audrey mentioned it earlier. You can sell a bag of dope one time and a gun, but that person over and over again. Sexually transmitted infections, abortions, birth control, all very controversial topics. This is when your own opinions, bias, judgment should not come into play. Your values actually don't matter. You are not that child's caregiver, right? You're not their parent. And in Massachusetts, children have medical rights. So our job is to push our values to the side and say, who is the right person to be engaging this child in this conversation to make sure they get the right information so they can make an informed decision about their body? Because one thing we know is that abortion is a form of birth control in the commercial sex industry. Now, I don't know about any of you, regardless of my personal beliefs, but I would rather a child get a medical procedure done safely with a medical provider than to be researching on the internet where they can buy medication, doing it on their own, right? Not getting proper medical care, out of fear of talking to trusted adults or what their trafficker might do to them. And so really being mindful of that. Hormone injections, Botox, filler, binders, packers, things that we notice that a child financially can't afford, that is acquiring perhaps to pass in the gender they feel most comfortable, right? Again, judgment aside. This child doesn't even have a job, but we've noticed physical changes in their body, how they present, in their voice tone, things of that nature. And then I think about things like new friends, older teens or adult. As someone that has teenagers, friends are always changing. There's something developmentally appropriate about that. And when I notice they've kind of pushed their square friends away, the ones that aren't being trafficked, right? And now they're hanging with a much older crowd, drinking, smoking, or getting the stuff for quote unquote free. I got to be asking questions. They've withdrawn from families or friends or things they once loved. And as I mentioned earlier, some of these things present in other types of trauma. But when coupled together, right, you're thinking of a client right now, you probably should have already filed on that young person. I get it. Filing is scary. But in Massachusetts, we're not filing against a child. We're filing on behalf of a child getting services, whether that's through the Department of Mental Health, Department of Children and Families, Department of Youth Services. The goal here is to wrap this kid up in services. How does that happen? When you file that mandated report that then goes to the local district attorney's office, the local DCF office, a CSEC coordinator comes into play in that county, and we now have a multidisciplinary team responding to how to best support that child, right? And so it's not about, do you think? If you think, you should have already filed, right? And that's what it looks like in Massachusetts. So how do you do this, right? How do you wave a magic wand and just engage in these conversations? Well, it's not that simple. If it was, I'd be making a lot of money, right? The bottom line is we never know when a child's going to disclose. And it's complicated because we all want them to disclose, quite frankly, as less as they need to, minimal facts to the right people, wrong people. We just want to make sure that they don't have to repeat this story over and over again. And we all play a different role. I know as a social worker, my goal is not to have this child disclose the full trauma to me because this could turn into a criminal investigation. And how do I respond to the child that's sitting right in front of me? The child that clearly has therapeutic rapport with me. Maybe I'm driving them to Dunkin' Donuts, or I'm sitting in the office waiting for them to be picked up. And who knows? They just always thought I was a nice person. And they say, hey, can I talk to you? Well, here's the hit. None of us know when a child's going to disclose something that we as mandated reporters are going to have to do something about. But usually pretty quickly, we figure out either based on body language, nonverbals, the way they're sitting, their body position, that maybe this is going to be something that they don't want other people to hear. So we don't have 45 minutes to go find the ideal sensory room or quiet place, but we do our best to say, hey, it seems like you really want to talk. Let me go see if this room's available right here, because I want to make sure this is as confidential as possible. It's a couple seconds, right? If I'm driving, usually I pull over the car. And then the kid starts talking. Well, some of us are fixers. So as the young person's talking, you already have 15 different responses in your brain. You're just waiting for them to stop, and you're like, when she stops or when they stop, this is what I'm going to ask, and I'm going to encourage you to stop. The best thing you can do in these situations is to be present. And to be present, to be actively engaged in this conversation means my cell phone's off. I'm not sitting behind my desk with a computer, looking up, saying, right? I'm not taking notes, which I completely understand why people take notes, right? You don't want to, forget important information. And to that young person sitting across from you, that's when I start to get really nervous. Like, why is that person writing that down? Where is that going? Or why did they only write that down, but they didn't write everything else down? So this is what I'm going to encourage you just to be present. Now, here's the reality. You don't have to remember every single thing. The best thing you can do in that situation is to just be present and engaged. Now, the other thing I want to caution you on, we're not robots, we're humans, right? Now, some of you have been in this work much longer than others. And me, I've been in the field with this population for over 15 years. There's always going to be a situation when a kid says something that you weren't ready for, and you as a human have a reaction to it. But the things you need to be mindful of is if the kid's sliding you the tissues, now we have a problem, right? Because I need to put Nikki back together. I don't think Nikki's a safe person anymore because I just started talking and she's falling apart. So how do you contain that situation without causing them to flood? Right? And it's a dance that we do. So you let them talk. And I guess the way I've always done it is, it's what do I need to know for safety versus what I want to know are two very different things. And if I'm sticking to safety, I'm probably safe. It's when I start asking all those detailed oriented questions because I want to know, that's what gets me into trouble. And the most important thing is, before you go to the next steps is, did you put that kid back together, right? Are they okay? What do they need? Do they need a safety plan for tonight, even if they appear fine, right? Who do I need to communicate to? Do they need a check-in later? And then, before I go file that mandated report or checking with their parents or whatever the next steps are, here comes the hit. The kid says, are you going to tell anyone? Yes, because my job is not to be a child's friend. And to be a safe, consistent adult is oftentimes undoing all of the harm they've experienced over and over again. I give them permission to be mad. I give them permission to be frustrated, right? But I don't say I'm going to keep this a secret. I don't make false promises. And it's okay to be upset with me, right? But I let them know I do have to tell somebody because I couldn't go to bed tonight knowing that harm could come your way. Now, the most important piece comes after the fact, right? How do I act the next time I see them? Don't be weird. I don't know how better to say that, right? It starts with us role modeling. Engage with the child. Hi, how are you? It's good to see you. Because they're watching us at all times. I'm that safe, predictable adult. Our conversations after that situation don't have to be about what they disclosed. It could just be as simple as, how you doing today? And I keep it moving. I'm also not going to force them to engage in a conversation or relationship with me if they need time, because that's okay too. Now I want to talk a little bit about how do you make a referral? So for Massachusetts providers, Typically, what we're looking at is anyone under the age of 18 at time of referral, regardless of gender, sexual orientation. Now, what gets tricky is almost all of the young people we serve are considered at risk. But is this young person going missing from care? Are they posting pictures or videos and being paid for them? Are they coming back with items that they can't financially afford? Unexplained cash, gang affiliation, much, much older boyfriend or girlfriend. Well, as I mentioned earlier, that's also way more information that you need in the state of Massachusetts to file in the first place. So if you're working with a young person that you think is been trafficked, confirmed or not, or at very high risk, meaning based on some of the signs, behaviors, it's pretty clear that something is probably going on. You can make a referral to My Life, My Choice for a survivor mentor. You can just go onto our website, mylifemychoice.org, and it's right there on the tab. The most important thing to note is they have to be under the age of 18 at time of referral. This is regardless of sexual orientation or gender. It's really important when you're filling out this form, they are very clear on what is a child's preferred language, first language, what language does a family speak, right? And in that write-up, we need to know, what are your concerns specific to trafficking? We know these kids are wonderful people, but we want to prioritize these cases. So what are the specific signs and behaviors that you've witnessed or seen that have made you cause, to make this referral? And once that referral has been made, one of the great things is this is a voluntary service. So we give voice and choice back to the young people we serve. But for those of you that are concerned about that, if a child says no, we still hold on to that file. As long as they were assessed before the time of 18, even if they denied services and then they turn 18, if they were assessed prior, they can still be matched. Our service doesn't stop at 18, which means that young person that maybe just aged out of systems can re-sign their paperwork and continue working with their mentor. I actually think right now, almost 40% of the young people we serve are over the age of 18. That benefit of that positive, consistent relationship can continue as long as they want. So again, if you have questions related to making a referral for Survivor Mentor, mylifemychoice.org.